to part 2 with Dan Daly. He's right here.
Hey everybody, nice to see you again. Maybe, is that how this works? I don't know.
I think so. And of course, you should watch part 1 if you haven't. Dan Daly is a scenic designer here in Brooklyn, New York. He and I went to school together at Carnegie Mellon. We've known each other for a long time. We've also worked on a couple of projects together and worked with same companies on different shows. We're just going to get right into it. And this one, we're going to talk about kind of like the collaboration, and it's helpful that he and I have actually collaborated, but the collaboration between scenic design and costume design. So I think it would be great to ask you, from your experience on shows, when do you typically meet the costume designer?
So it's different on every show, but I very strongly believe in meeting very early on. I kind of believe in that there is, at the beginning of the production, there is no set designer, there is no costume designer, there is no director, where you're all just collaborators working on a piece. So all ideas are valid at the beginning. You know, if I have an idea for how someone's shoes look, it's just as valid as if the costume designer has an idea for the size of the window. You know, at the beginning, there is no there's no differentiation. And from that point, you know, things do become more different from there. But when we're talking about ideas and talking about sort of the concept of the piece, I want everyone's opinion because my opinion might not be right. So I'm constantly trying to be involved with the costume designer. The more successful renditions of this, when I've worked with people, you know, we'll start kind of separate, where we're all talking to the director separately, and then we all meet for a couple of big meetings. And at those big meetings, we're all very open and honest about how we're feeling about the piece. There's a couple of people I know that have been really great at that. My friend Emily, she's an amazing costume designer. Emily Woods Hogue, we worked on this piece called, I wrote it down because I forget names of shows all the time, Her Naked Skin. It was at the Boston Conservatory. What was so incredible about her is she brought all of this historical research, but also emotional research right off the bat. And I brought the same sort of stuff, and we were able to bounce right off of each other and see that, oh, wow, that's a picture of a person, you know, in a costume, but the background is incredible, and I'm going to steal some of that for my design. So we were able to really play well together. And then when it came to the tech process, the same thing happened between her and I, where, you know, she would be like, that room's a little bit smaller than I imagined it being. Is there a way that we can do something? And I went, yeah, sure, blah, 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 blah. And like, oh, that coat is amazing, but I didn't put a place to hang it. You know, maybe we put it over the chair instead, or something like that. And it's just a lot of give and take, which is very helpful. Working with people in costumes, it kind of runs the gamut, and it starts at the very beginning moment to right before the show opens, making sure that we are always in discussion with each other. The two biggest things that costume designers and set designers work with is time period and color. Because when you're doing a period piece, sometimes there's money for one of the things to be period, but not money for both of the things to be period. So a lot of times I will defer to, you know, the costume designer to say, do you have the ability to make this period costumes? If they do, then I might step back and say, we are doing a purely emotional set because we don't have the money to do it, and we can tell time and place through costumes. The opposite is very true as well. Sometimes it is that I got my hands on some really good molding, and I can do this thing that'll give us the exact location, but we don't have the money to do it costume-wise, or we don't have the ability to create all the pieces. So that play between me and the costume designer is really important on a lot of, especially operas that I work on. The other thing with color is I can't tell you the number of times that me and the costume designer did not talk well enough, and suddenly there's a person wearing a red shirt in front of a red wall.
And all been there.
Yep. And it's not because either of us did something wrong. It's not because of anything. It's just something fell through the cracks. And the problem is that a lot of times higher ups in theater see costumes as the easier thing to change. Ooh. So they'll be like, well, can't you just dye the shirt, or can't you just buy a new shirt? Yes. Whereas the set design, because they recognize how much money scenery costs, where they don't always recognize how much money costumes costs.
Right.
So that sort of issue that comes up is something that I really try hard to fight before we get to that point. But when it happens, we have to figure out how's the best way to achieve it. Sometimes it's me throwing a bunch of pictures on a wall. Sometimes it's me literally going in at midnight and repainting the wall blue. There was a piece I worked on once at the Winnipesaukee Playhouse that I was a tech director on. They kept on having that issue, and we repainted those walls 4 times. And it's a summer stock. Literally, we repainted, like, the set was in, and we went through and repainted the walls a bunch of times because we just couldn't get it right. It happens. It's you live, you learn.
I think to that point, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I always push for in productions. And it's one of the things that producers don't necessarily want to pay for, all of the meetings and stuff. And something that I've just kind of like taken, my ethos is, you're paying me a flat fee. I can't separate out the amount of work that I'm doing prior to the show opening by that flat fee. It's just not fair, right? To me, if I do, oh, this hour and this hour, like, this is how much work you're getting. It's just a lot of work for a flat fee. It always is. That's kind of just, you want to design, you want your name on that playbill, then you kind of have to put in the work. And so to me, I try to insert myself into every single conversation I can be there, so that we don't get to a point where the dress is the same color as the wall, and it comes down to the producer saying, change the dress. Because that's always what it will. I'm glad that you recognize it, but that's always what it will be. But I also think there's something to be said too about, like, being in with the scenic designer in such a way. I think in the last video you talked about the research level, right? And I talk about this all the time, is research, research, research. I have so much research for the show, so that by the time that I get around to actually designing and drawing the piece, I have lived with that research so much that I can make instinctual drawings and designs based on that research. I don't necessarily have to have the research pulled up. I'll go back in and be like, okay, now there's that one skirt that I really liked the bottom of, and the director really liked the bottom of, and the scene designer really liked the bottom. So how do I draw that? And I'll pull that up. But for the most part, especially when I'm doing something that's period adjacent, which is kind of how I always design. I never design straight out period. I always have like my own spin on it. I will have lived with that historical research for so long that I can kind of instinctually make those. I know this is the silhouette that we're going for, but it allows me to influence, like, to add modern influences into it. And so similarly, I love to have the scenic design package in there. I love to have it in there with me, with all of my research, so that I'm also making instinctual line choices that are, like, inspired by the scenic design. And that's why having all those conversations is so great, because it really lets the set and the costume work together in such a way. And then, of course, there's shows where you want them to work against each other, which is always really fun. And I think that requires even more communication to be able to say, I need to pop my costumes completely away from your set.
Yeah, and that's, like, I make it a very conscious choice that when I finish that, like we talked about before, that big package of all these documents that I create, I send it to everybody.
Right.
I send it to the costume designer, I send it to the sound designer, I send it to everybody, because I don't know what's going to influence you. And I don't know, like, I know sound a little bit, but I don't know everything about it. So I want to make sure that they have all of, like, everyone has all of the information that I am giving out, so that, you might come to be like, oh, hey, Dan, I noticed your door frame is only 3 feet wide. This person's in a hoop skirt. You might want to think about that, because that's an issue that we wouldn't notice until that person was on stage and they couldn't fit through that doorway. I can't make you look at those things, but I can give them to you, and I can make sure that that it's also that little bit of that contract that I talk about, where, like, I'm covering my own butt a little bit by handing it to you, and then if at tech you go, well, the skirt can't make it through the door, and I go, you knew the door was 3 feet, then that's not my fault anymore.
What would be helpful for a costume designer to know about scenic design if they just truly don't, you know, have any knowledge of it?
Yeah, I think one of the most valuable things to know about scenic design is, a lot of people will talk about, like, how it works, but I think the materiality is really important in scenic design and in costume design as well, where we both work with very specific types of material, and understanding how they look and feel and relate to each other. Because if you have, like, you can do red shirt on red background, as we've been saying, if the red background is high gloss, plastic something, and the red in front of it is I don't know, like a cotton, very subdued sort of texture. Materials are really the way to understand how we all work together. When I am creating a floor, I think all the time about what the actors are wearing for shoes. Because, you know, if there's someone that has to be barefoot, I have to be very careful about what that floor is made out of. If they're wearing sneakers, I can be much less careful about what it's made out of. So there's a lot of, I think like talking with the designer about the materials is something that doesn't usually happen, but can be very, very helpful.
Right. Right. Like even I was just thinking when you said that about the floors, you know, I did a show where it was scaffolding, and I was assured that it was going to be wooden stepped steel scaffolding, and so I put everyone in high stiletto, the skinniest stilettos you can ever have, and this was when they were trendy, of course. Then the scaffolding got delivered; it was the wrong order, and it was that grated metal. And a big part of my design was those shoes. And, you know, then it became a conversation with the scenic designer, what can we do? And then with the actors who were wearing them as well. And I had one actress who was like, you just walk on the balls of your feet. And she ran up and down those stairs in these terrifying 6-inch stilettos. um, and
Jeez.
and it scared me and the scenic designer so much that he ended up actually putting down some, like, I think Luan or something down on the steps. But so much of my job is interacting with the actor as well, and their comfort and their physicality. And I think that maybe that also influences your scenery too, right?
Mhm. Well, I think one of the big things too to remember is that once we've kind of split off from like all being collaborators into our own little sections, is we're designing at the same time.
Right.
So we're going to be like each of us is going to be running into issues as we go along, and the more you tell me about your issues, the more I can help. You know, so in the same other ways. So like, there's plenty of times where I'm working and suddenly I need to change the material of the stairs, like you're saying, and there's sort of nothing I can do because of time, money, whatever. I immediately go tell the costume designer because I know that's going to influence what they're doing. And if, like we were talking before, if you catch stuff early enough, then you don't have to worry about it at the end, because tech is stressful enough as it
Oh,
is.
yes.
Like the last thing you need is to wait and let stuff build up to become problems then.
Is there anything you'd like to say about what's kind of coming up in the industry as far as you know, see design or costume design that you're seeing that gives you kind of hope? You know, this Corona thing is probably in some ways actually super game changing.
Yeah, I think that what's kind of exciting right now was we've hit this pause button, basically, where it was really disappointing and sad that all these shows got canceled and that a lot of stuff, you know, sort of fell to the wayside. But at the same point, it's giving us all an opportunity to sit down and think about what it is that we're doing, both as people and as artists and as theater makers. And a lot of the stuff that we were doing wasn't always the greatest. You know, there was a lot of companies charging people to work for them, and a lot of you know, design work and plays that may not have been the best things to be talking about right now. And I think that this pause is giving a lot of people time, because in theater we work so much, and like I said, I did 20 something shows last year. I didn't have time to really think about conceptually the entire industry, and this pause is giving us a moment to do that.
Yeah. Well, I'll wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming on here and talking with us. You know, I think it's really cool to be able to share your viewpoint in the world of theater and kind of you as a collaborator. You know. Um,
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me. I mean, I'm always excited to talk about sort of how to survive making theater, because it's not easy and it's not something you learn in school. You know, you learn about the art, you learn about the technical stuff, but you don't learn about how to be a person while making all this theater. So I am really into that. If anybody wants to talk about it more, please let me know. I'm happy to talk with people.
Oh yeah, and I should mention that in the description will be all the ways to contact Dan and have future conversations with him. He's a lovely human being. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. I'll see you around.
Bye.
Bye.